Welcome back to Slide Into Sports live on 103.1 FM on WVLP Radio. I'm your host, Ryan Schleier, aka Schlide, and last week of sports was just absolutely incredible. College basketball, there were some absolutely insane games. One of them being last night, the number 1 team in the country gets dethroned by the number 9 Kansas Jayhawks at Allen Fieldhouse. I mean, it was just an absolute electric game to watch. It was so much fun to watch. It was a very amazing game. Arizona was dominant for a large part of that game, but then Kansas was able to shut them down on defense within the last 10 minutes of the second half, and that was it. Kansas controlled the game at that point, and they were just able to hang around despite Arizona's early dominance in the paint. So there's that. We also have a news breaking thing with the Winter Olympics. That is happening right now in Italy. And Lindsey Vonn, she suffered a injury that we're going to be talking about later in the podcast. And we also have the Mountain West gaining a new team in their football, part of the conference, which I think, and this new addition is very spicy. I will say that, because this is some addition that a lot of people have been asking for and wanting for a while. They have been practically begging for this to happen. So we're going to get all into that. But first, we're going to just dip into college basketball really fast. We're going to talk about the AP poll and look at the rankings. Obviously, these rankings could change pretty drastically next week because these rankings came out before Arizona lost to Kansas. So we're going to get right into this. So Arizona, at this point, was still the undisputed number 1 team in the country. Michigan, number 2 still. Houston jumps up 5 spots to number 3. Duke stays at 4 despite losing to North Carolina on the road. Iowa State moves up to number 5. UConn falls to 6 after losing to St. John's 81-72. Nebraska jumps up to 7 after a win against Rutgers. Illinois falls 3 spots to 8 after losing to Michigan State 85-82. Kansas jumps up to 9, and they're going to be jumping up a little bit more after that win against Arizona. And then Michigan State, they round out the top 10 there after beating Illinois. Then you've got North Carolina jumping up to 11 after beating Duke. Gonzaga falls to number 12, obviously after the loss to Portland. That was pretty big. Purdue, they moved down 1 spot to 13th. They played a really close game against Oregon, who is down their 2 best players and currently only has 1 win in the Big Ten. So weirdly close win for Purdue there, and I'm surprised they only moved down 1 spot for that. Florida, they move up to 14th after beating Texas A&M. Florida now securing the first place spot in the SEC in the regular season. Virginia, they're at 15th. They beat Syracuse 72-59. Texas Tech falls down to 16th, but they did beat West Virginia 70-63. And they have a big game coming up against Arizona at Arizona this weekend, so that's going to be huge for them to give them an opportunity to jump into the maybe top 10, definitely top 15 for sure. St. John's moves up 5 spots to number 17 after accumulating wins against UConn and Xavier. St. Louis moves up 1 spot to 18th after beating LaSalle 82-58. Vandy falls to 19th after losing to Oklahoma 92-91. Oklahoma right now, one of the worst teams in the SEC, so pretty bad loss for Vandy. But, they're not down and out. They only have 4 losses, so Vandy is probably still going to be a tournament team and will likely finish the season in the top 25, unless they just spin out of control for no reason whatsoever. Then you've got Clemson at 20, and Clemson almost lost to Stanford. They had an interesting game against Cal. They beat them 77-55, but only 4 losses for this Clemson team. They've got 20 wins, so decent spot for them. You've got Arkansas at 21st, 17-6. They beat Mississippi State 88-68. Then you got BYU falling to 22nd, falling 6 spots after losing to Houston 77-66. Now, the fraudulent narrative following BYU, it just keeps growing because they just can't seem to beat any of these big teams that are above them. So BYU is desperate, I think, for a win. They have 6 losses right now, but they're still in the top 25. So they're just kind of hanging around. Miami in at number 23. They're now the only remaining undefeated college basketball team in men's college basketball right now. They beat Marshall 90-74. Then you've got Louisville at 24th with 17-6 record, and they absolutely thumped North Carolina State last night. If I told you the score, I'm not even sure if you'd believe me if you didn't watch the game, but 118-77. I mean, that's the 5th most that Louisville has scored in their school history in a single college basketball game. It's tied for the 5th most, which is really making me wonder how dominant Louisville was way back in the day, because I did not look up the other scores that were better than this, but just absolutely dominating performance by Louisville. And then you've got Kentucky rounding out the top 25 after beating Tennessee 74-71. Now, Tennessee and Kentucky have both, they're both kind of even, I think. They've been kind of bouncing in and out of the top 25 for the AP poll. But yeah, both these teams pretty solid when they're on fire, but when they're not, it's not good. But, or not like, not good, but like not nearly as good in comparison, I don't think, but they can still beat pretty much anybody. Then you've got Alabama getting the next number amount of votes. Like for honorable mention, they got 72 points. Iowa also got receiving votes. NC State got receiving votes. Tennessee, Villanova, Utah State, Georgia, Santa Clara, Auburn, and St. Mary's were the other teams that got first place, or not first place votes, but votes from at least one AP voter this week. So, yeah, I remember towards the beginning of the year when there was a lot of teams in this category where they were receiving votes. But as the season goes on, that is going to continue to dwindle as more teams start to prove themselves worthy and or unworthy of being in the top 25. So that is just something I like to keep an eye on just as the season goes on. It really tells me how close we are to the end. And we're currently on week 14, or going into week 15. Absolutely crazy that we're already at this point with college basketball. But yeah, just an absolutely amazing week for college basketball. I think last night, Arizona versus Kansas might have been the game of the week in terms of college basketball week, because it starts on... It like starts and ends on Monday, so technically Arizona Kansas was, I guess, this week. But yeah, it's weird because, you know, again, like with college football, the AP poll comes out on Sunday, and then you don't see any teams play until like Tuesday or Wednesday or Thursday, Friday, Saturday. So yeah, with that being said, there's some big college football news, like I said before, with a new team joining the FBS level, and that team is North Dakota State. Now, this should scare some people a little bit because in the FCS level, North Dakota State is a very dominant program. I mean, you look at JMU jumped from the FCS level to the FBS level, and they had an immediate impact in the Sun Belt Conference, and I mean, they should have won it the first year they were there, but because they technically weren't like in it for, I think it was 2 or 3 years or something like that, they weren't able to take home the trophy, which is or participate in that championship game, which is really weird to me, but you know, it is what it is. But yeah, North Dakota State joining the Mountain West after the Mountain West basically got most of their teams poached by the new Pac-12. So, good move, good timing, I think, for the Mountain West and for North Dakota State. And one of the reasons why I'm super excited about this is because there's been a lot of debate online as to whether the Group of Five should be on the same level as the Power Four conferences, or if the Group of Five should be treated like the FCS, and like all of these different conversations. And now, with an FCS team, a recent FCS team, now moving into the Power 4 level, I think it's going to bring a new kind of parity into the sport. I think it's going to how do I put this? It's going to add some depth. And North Dakota State, like I said before, they were a dynasty in the FCS level. They were a very dominant team. They were winning the national championship there practically every year. So seeing them jump from the FCS level to finally going into the FBS level is very interesting and intriguing, to say the least. Now, for North Dakota State, I think, obviously they're going to be putting down a lot of money to not only join the Mountain West as a football-only school, but they're also going to be putting a pretty penny down to the NCAA just to transfer into the FBS level. So, obviously, a lot of money is being put down for this move, but I think in the long run, it's going to really help North Dakota State. It's going to bring a lot more eyes to North Dakota State football, and with that being said, it's going to bring more money, and again, the more interest you have, with just general interest, the more eyes you have on your team, the more someone is likely to invest. You look at Oregon, right? Phil Knight, alma mater to Oregon, he throws money down. Oregon is good every year, no matter what. Is it because of Phil Knight? Maybe. Probably. Because he's putting money down for the facilities, he's putting money down for players, and North Dakota State has some really good facilities. So I think it's a very good move, and I am very curious to see how this plays out in the college football world and what North Dakota State's non-conference is going to look like. So, yeah. All right, with that being said, we're going to transition now into the Winter Olympics. The big breaking news right now is Lindsey Vonn. She suffered an injury on one of her downhill runs when I think it was in one of the preliminary rounds, but her right arm got stuck on one of the gates and it bumped her and she tumbled down the hill, and that's why she ended up getting airlifted off the course. She is okay, but according to her Instagram, she posted a picture and gave us an update of what the injury was, what the extent of the injury was, how she felt about doing the race. If she could do it over again, she'd do it over again. Just didn't really have regrets about doing the run in the first place. And she retired after the 2018 Olympics, so this was her comeback year. And what's also crazy is that, again, according to her Instagram page, she actually had a ACL tear going into this Winter Olympics, and she still did 2 other runs. So just really inspiring for Lindsey Vonn to do that, just to continue and endure the pain, just to live out the dream. She could still ski, and according to her Instagram, she said, more specifically about the injury, she said, "I was simply 5 inches too tight on my line when my right arm hooked inside of the gate, twisting me and resulted in my crash. My ACL and past injuries had nothing to do with my crash whatsoever," which I think is a good sign, because that means when she was doing her other races, she was able to competently balance. She was able to go the speeds that she wanted to go and make the right turns and all that. Obviously, doing it on a torn ACL is a big adjustment. Last year, I talked about Curtis Rourke around the time of the NFL draft and how it was announced that he was actually playing throughout the entire regular season minus the first game with I believe it was MCL tear, and that's why he wore a brace after the first or second game. So Lindsey doing this while skiing, I think, is again, really inspiring and very comparable to that. Just because you if you can still play, if you can still do your sport despite the injury, I think a lot of people have a lot of respect for that, because that just means you have a very strong mentality about yourself. For the injury, though, she did come out of surgery. She said, unfortunately, I sustained a complex tibia fracture that is currently stable, but will require multiple surgeries to fix properly. So she's still going to be undergoing surgeries, but just really inspiring, again, despite not it going the way that she wanted it to go, or for really anybody wanting it to go. I think a lot of people wanted to see her come back and win gold. It would have been absolutely amazing, especially if she did it all on an ACL tear. That would have been pretty legendary. I'm not gonna lie, that would have been pretty freaking awesome. But yeah, unfortunately, just didn't go her way, and I think everyone in the country can sympathize with Lindsey Vonn right now. All right, kind of going back to college basketball, we're going to talk about just some of the other games that happened. There was some, again, like I said before, there were some absolutely incredible games. Florida, Texas A&M talked about the score at least, but it was an absolutely dominating performance by Florida. Texas A&M being the number one team in the SEC last week, I'd said it was kind of surprising that they weren't in the AP top 25. They at least got votes, but they weren't in the top 25. But I said that this would have been a great opportunity for the Aggies to really prove themselves as a top 25 team to take down last year's national champions. But ultimately, it just didn't happen. They didn't really have control of the game at any point. They put up, I believe it was 21 points in the first half. It was not really a great performance, but Florida has just been on an absolute tear right now. They're playing some of their best basketball right now, which is a great sign for them going into March. Now, when I look at these teams, and especially around this time, I look at the teams that are hot, I look at the teams that are cold, and I pool them all together and see which teams are likely going to make the tournament. Now, the reason why I look at this is because the amount of times before I started the show, I would always be like, oh, Kentucky's good. They have John Calipari, blah, blah, blah. And then they would get cold in around this time, like in February, like beginning, middle, late February. They'd lose earlier than they were supposed to in the SEC tournament, and then they'd ultimately get upset in like the first or second round. So that's part of the reason why I look at things like that. And the other reason, actually, is when I did start my show, I think it might have been the first year I started my show, actually. This was when Purdue made it to the national championship and played UConn. Now, I didn't have Purdue going very far, but NC State was a team that I was really impressed by because they were seeded last in the ACC tournament that year, and they went all the way through, won their way into the March Madness tournament. If they didn't win that tournament, they were not playing in the tournament. They ended up winning every single game that was in front of them, and then they go into they do a play-in game. They're not even in a like one of the 64 regular teams. They were one of the last 4 teams in, and they were only in because they won the ACC title. And they went in as an 11 seed and just ran through everybody that was in their path. And obviously they lost to Purdue in the Final Four, but I was one of the crazies that had NC State in the Final Four. So yeah, like looking at teams, and I mean, it's kind of based off eye test. It's kind of looking at the stats that they put up, the records, but just looking at all that stuff like that is, I mean, that's really what you need to look at when you're going into the tournament. Now, obviously, there's some other factors that you have to take into account, like strength of schedule and, you know, which conference that each team is in, how each conference is performing in comparison to the other conferences, and taking all of that into account, that's how I make my brackets typically. So, yeah, again, that's why I look at stuff like that. And that's why kind of like I mentioned earlier with BYU. Like, BYU doesn't really have that great of a win right now, and they haven't really been competitive with, besides Arizona, they haven't really been competitive with teams in the top 15, and that makes me a little nervous about this BYU team. I think, looking at them right now, like, they're very talented, don't get me wrong, but I could see them as first-round exits. I could very easily see them as first-round exits. And that's because they go into these tests, but they don't come out on top. They just don't seem to find a way to come out on top. And part of the reason why the BYU game was so close with Arizona was because it was at BYU. And BYU is one of the toughest places to play in the country. That is a really tough arena to play. And the fact that Houston beat them by 11 in their own place is very impressive. All right, another game that was absolutely insane, Duke versus North Carolina. Now, this one was absolutely crazy because with 0.4 seconds left, North Carolina gets a game-sealing three-pointer, and they storm the court. And the student section storms the court, and there's still time left on the clock. So, at the time, the clock did hit 0, but the officials were still looking to make sure that it was official, because obviously, you got to make sure that the ball leaves the hand to make sure that, he didn't shoot it after the clock went off. You got to make, obviously for Duke, if you're Duke and you have 0.4 seconds, you want those 0.4 seconds to have some kind of opportunity to score. So they had to de-storm the court as quickly as possible, and then after 0.4 seconds, they restormed the court again. And North Carolina ended up facing a $50,000 fine. Allegedly, there was a Duke staffer that suffered some kind of injury that caused him to bleed. So that was also another story of controversy within the end of that game. But it's a rivalry game. It's one of the most heated college basketball rivalries in the entire country. So I'm not really surprised that it went down like that. But what a win for North Carolina at their place. I think that was a really great win for them, an absolute statement of a win for North Carolina and the Tar Heels. Now, we've also got Illinois-Michigan State. Now, this one went into overtime, but Michigan State, they ended up winning. And Michigan State, and this really isn't that controversial of a take, but Jeremy Fears and his antics, they need to go. I remember after the Minnesota game, Tom Izzo said that he was probably going to have Jeremy Fears on the bench as self-punishment for the team. Obviously, that didn't really go as planned when Illinois was up in the first half and they had the early advantage, so he kind of had to go in, but or he definitely needed to be in for the first half. But yeah, Jeremy Fears, people are going online about this and making a bunch of comments, and part of the reason that it's really becoming controversial now is because of the Michigan State game and Dusty May calling out Michigan State and their antics of tripping and pushing and just doing things that they should not be doing and getting away with it. A lot of basically calling out the no calls and asking for people to keep an eye out for it, and people kept an eye out for it during the Minnesota game, and people started looking back in slow-mo. They started looking at the different angles, and it looked pretty bad. It looked really bad when he was doing that. So before this Illinois game, Tom Izzo in the post-game press conference after the Minnesota game said he was probably going to bench Jeremy Fears for a game. Obviously, didn't happen because he played for 43 minutes. So, yeah. so much for that. But very tough fight by the Illini, putting up, being able to keep it that close with Michigan State at their place. Pretty impressive, because Michigan State, also one of those places in the country where it is just absolutely really tough to play at. So, great win by Michigan State, but tainted with a little bit of controversy. Okay, so a couple of other games that I kind of want to go over that were huge. Obviously, St. John's, UConn, that was a big one. A lot of free throws were thrown by St. John's, but that's what happens when you foul a bunch, and I'm not really surprised that the St. John's beat UConn. I had a feeling that was going to be a trap game. Patino and Hurley, the two coaches of these teams, they have a little bit of hostility towards each other. Last year, St. John's won the Big East Conference tournament, and obviously these two teams are at the top of the Big East. There's a little bit of a gap separating those two and Villanova, and then there's a big gap between Villanova and everybody else. So, yeah, it was going to be a very hostile game. And, St. John's ended up coming out on the other end of it, because you look at the personal fouls, UConn committed 23 personal fouls. That's nuts. But you look at the free throws, UConn only had 12 opportunities at the free throw line. They only made 5 of them. They only made 5. St. John's was at the free throw line 31 times, okay? They were there 31 times and made 22 free throws. So some people can look at this and be like, oh, St. John's, they just made the free throws and that's how they won. Well, you got to get to the line somehow. And if you're fouling, then you're going to get to the line. So, yeah, with that being said, let's move on to the next game. That I think this is one of the bigger games that happened last week as well that has a lot of meaning. Obviously, this one, very much a surprise. Very, very much a surprise. And this was on this is on the crazy Wednesday upset. There was just so many upsets on Wednesday. It was absolutely insane. There was obviously the Michigan State-Minnesota game, where Minnesota, despite Michigan State's antics, still comes out on top, 76-73. You had BYU-Oklahoma State, where BYU travels to Oklahoma State and loses 92-99, and that's part of the reason why BYU fell to the number 22 spot. And then, last but not least, Gonzaga loses to Portland, 80-87. Now, this is the big one that we're going to be talking about, okay? So, Gonzaga is the best team in the West Coast Conference right now. I don't think anybody can really have any kind of debate about that, but not anymore. Not after that loss to Portland. And I think this might be the first time that I've ever seen this, at least with the West Coast Conference, but Santa Clara is currently on top in the West Coast Conference. They currently sit 12-1 with a 21-5 overall record. Gonzaga now 11-1 with a 23-2 record. And Portland, being their only loss in conference, is just absolutely insane to me. I can't even believe it. I can't even believe it. Just absolutely insane. And Portland, at the time they played Gonzaga, was the 4th worst team in the West Coast Conference. They were the 4th worst team in the conference, and now they move up to the 5th worst team. They have a 5-8 record in the conference. They're 12-14 overall. This was not a really that great Portland team. And Gonzaga, they've beaten some great teams this year, but ultimately, it was a trap. It was a trap game, because I'm sure they probably went in thinking, oh, this is the 4th worst team in the West Coast Conference, and we're on top we haven't lost a conference game. There's no way we're losing to Portland, but then they ended up losing. So just absolutely insane work by Portland getting that win over Gonzaga. And really, all of these crazy wins just tells you that March is coming, and this is going to be an absolutely insane March. Now, last year, it was insane, but not really in the same way that you would expect, like where you'd see a Cinderella run. There wasn't really a Cinderella run in March Madness last year, which was kind of surprising. I think the closest team to a Cinderella run was Arkansas as a double-digit seed, making it to the Sweet 16, but otherwise, there wasn't really a Cinderella run. This year, I think it's going to be different, and I'm really excited for it. I don't know what the brackets are going to look like yet, because obviously we don't know who's going to win each of the conferences, and normally conference winners can actually stir up some controversy, because sometimes there's a team like NC State a couple years ago where they're last in their tournament, and they go on to win the tournament, and you win your conference tournament, you're automatically in to the March Madness tournament. So teams that win those tournaments that really aren't supposed to be win or really even be competitive with the higher ranked teams within their conference, they end up winning, and it pushes out some of those bubble teams that are supposed to be there. So yeah, with that being said, we're going to take a quick little break. I have a message from our sponsor, so we're going to listen to that message. So here we go. This broadcast is brought to you by Authentic Impact, a Northwest Indiana executive coaching practice working with family businesses to ensure their legacy. When you started your business, you made a promise to do things differently, better than anyone else. Over time, as the business grows, that promise can get diluted or even lost. Penny Schleier at Authentic Impact helps family business owners reignite that promise, weaving it into team engagement, performance, and hiring, so your passion becomes the heartbeat of your company again. Learn more at authentic-impact-coaching.com. Okay, so we're going to be looking ahead for college basketball, looking ahead to these games. Now, there's some pretty interesting ones, but we're not going to obviously go through all of them because that would be absolutely insane with less than 30 minutes to go on the show. But we're going to be going through, looking at some ones where I could see some big upsets, one where it's going to be where I think it could be game of the week or just a really close and electric game. Which games will have the most effect on the AP poll based on the hypothetical outcomes. It's sports at the end of the day. You kind of live in hypotheticals, but yeah. With that being said, I think an early game of the week, at least I think initially, could be Purdue-Nebraska. Now, part of the reason why I say this is because we've seen Purdue be good before, and Nebraska is one of the best teams in the country. Purdue could walk into Nebraska and upset them. However, I don't see that happening. After the way they played against Oregon and the way they've played a majority of their last 5 games, it's really hard for me to think that Purdue can walk into Nebraska and get a win from them. This Nebraska team, I think, has an argument as the best team in the Big Ten. They're one of the best teams, if not the best team, in the Big Ten right now. So I think, in all honesty, Nebraska is going to blow out Purdue. I really don't think it's going to be that much of a fight, but if it is and Purdue comes out on top, I think it's despite them being within 6 spots of each other on the AP poll, I think it could really shake up the rankings either way. I mean, if Purdue suffers a blowout loss to Nebraska, then I think they fall a couple spots, 3 spots at least, depending on the outcome of the game, obviously, and the way they play. Because this Purdue team has been pretty cold the past couple of games, besides the game against Maryland. So, don't really have a lot of faith in Purdue, but if they get something done, then I could see Nebraska dropping out of the top 10. Another game I think that could be very interesting, at least the outcome could serve as something interesting, is Florida versus Georgia, and that one is tomorrow at 6. The reason why I say this is because Georgia has been kind of in and out of the AP poll. The SEC teams have really been beating up on each other so far this year in college basketball. It's really hard to tell which team is the best in the SEC because they're all kind of at the same level. I mean, it's kind of like college football where a lot of the SEC teams are very good and they beat up on each other. But I feel like with basketball, it's a little bit different. I think right now that like SEC basketball has been really great the past couple of years. So I think it's a little bit elevated, at least to me. But yeah, I think if Georgia ends up beating Florida after Florida, has been rolling through teams, I think it's a great win for Georgia. And despite Georgia not being in the top 25 right now, I think that would be a really great win for them. And obviously losing to an unranked team is a pretty significant loss. So I think Florida will probably fall like 5 spots. So yeah, definitely. I will definitely be keeping an eye on that game for sure. Like 100%. Then we've got, I think, another game that could prove interesting, Clemson-Duke. Now, Duke is one that is a team that I feel like has kind of separated themselves from the ACC, especially after the way that they handled Louisville at their own place and at Duke's place. Like, they handled Louisville and at their own place. So, and Louisville is, weirdly enough, in a weird spot in the standings with the ACC. They're not even in the top 3 right now in the ACC. They're actually, they're 7th. They're 7th in the ACC standings. They're 7th. And one of the teams in front of them, despite absolutely killing them, is NC State, who is 4th in the ACC standings. I think that is very interesting. NC State currently with a 9-3 record in the ACC, but Duke and Clemson, both these teams in the ACC are 10-1. They're right now they're the 2 best teams in the ACC, and I don't really think a lot of people are at least thinking about that, just because there's obviously other ACC teams that are ranked above Clemson in the AP poll that are below them in the ACC standings, like North Carolina and Virginia, right? So I think this game could be one where people are like, oh, a ranked game, but it's going to be the number 1 versus number 2 teams in the ACC. Like, that is going to be an electric game. So, yeah. And this is on Saturday. That game's on Saturday at 11 a.m. There's also a couple of other big games that are happening on Saturday that I think are going to be at least interesting story-wise. Look at Texas A&M Vandy. Now, Vandy is ranked. Texas A&M suffering a really tragic loss against Florida. Now, I think for Texas A&M, you beat a ranked Vandy team. I think that is a great game to get the ball rolling again, quickly. Obviously, you don't want to go on a losing streak at this point of the year, because you go on a losing streak now, you're going to get cold, and probably not going to make it into the tournament. So, winning a game like this for Texas A&M is critical, especially if they want a good seed in the SEC tournament. Obviously, being the first seed is ideal, but the way the basketball the in-conference tournaments are set up is really intriguing, just because there's a lot of buys that can be had, and they go on for a decent amount, but you're able to kind of fit in more games in these college conference or college basketball in-conference championship tournaments, just because of being able to play multiple games in one day. They don't last 3 hours like football games do. They faster pace than football as well. So you're able to just crank out those conference tournament games. So I think Texas A&M getting the win against Vandy would be absolutely huge for them. Vandy currently is where? Well, they're currently behind A&M in the SEC conference standings. They're currently 5th. Texas A&M is 4th. So obviously, if Vandy beats Texas A&M, they jump up in the SEC standings, which is huge for them, and I think is very important, at least when it comes to making the March Madness tournament. Now, you may not be ranked very high in the AP poll, or maybe even unranked. I mean, Texas A&M is the 4th best team right now in the SEC, and they're unranked. But because they're ranked as high as they are within the conference, I think that is going to be something, well, I know that is something that the committee of people that puts together the March Madness tournament looks into, and they're like, okay, SEC played really tough in their own conference. They were beating up on people out of their conference, so we're going to give Texas A&M the nod because they're 4th in that conference, even though they're not ranked in the top 25, but most certainly in the top 50. So, yeah, I think for both these teams, it's imperative that they win. Obviously, you can't win every single game because, well, I'm not that you can't win every single game, but both teams can't win. So, depending on how this goes, could determine the fate of each of these teams as to whether they're maybe a 5 seed or whether they're an 8 or 9 seed. So, yeah, you gotta, wins right now matter. They really matter. We've also got Kansas versus Iowa State, a top 10 matchup, and Kansas has just been rolling. They have been rolling through people. They're on, I believe it's an 8-game win streak now, starting ironically with Iowa State. Actually, they beat Iowa State 84-63 back on January 13th, a month ago. So I think this game is going to be huge. It's at Iowa State, but Kansas coming off of a really tough run. I mean, they beat Baylor 80-62. Then they beat Colorado 75-69. Kansas State, they beat 86-82. Then they beat a ranked BYU team 90-82. Then a ranked Texas Tech team 64-61. Then they beat Utah 59-71. And then they beat the number 1 team in the country, Arizona, 82-78. And they don't have another game before this Iowa State game. So they're going to be rested going into this game. So you look at Iowa State. Now, Iowa State has been dominant themselves, especially since the loss to Cincinnati. They went on a little bit of a spiral after the Kansas game. They took a 9-point loss to Cincinnati. But then they beat UCF by 30 points. They beat Oklahoma State 84-71. Then they beat Colorado by 30 points. Then they beat Kansas State by 34 points. And then they beat Baylor 72-69. And they have a game against TCU tonight at 8 p.m. before they play this Kansas team. So Kansas is going to have one extra day of rest on this Iowa State team, but it is at Iowa State. So I think situationally, this is set up to be an absolutely electric matchup. I almost wish it was at Allen Fieldhouse after the way that they were, just the environment that was there for that Kansas versus Arizona game. I mean, it was so loud. They said it was in the 90s to 100s for the decibels. And that's with, I think they had 15,000 people there. It was so loud. It was so loud. But yeah, I think we're going to get an absolute banger of a game in Kansas versus Iowa State. I think that one will probably be, that one's going to be a close game. Obviously, because it's at Iowa State. Iowa State is kind of finding their thunder themselves. So yeah, I'm so excited for this game. And then finally, we've got Texas Tech versus Arizona this one's also on Saturday. This one is at 5:30. Now, obviously, this is the first time Arizona has lost this season. So, this game is important for Arizona because they're going to be sitting on this loss to Kansas for a week, or a little less than a week. Like, they play Texas Tech on Saturday the 14th, Valentine's Day. My favorite holiday. Anyway, I think it's going to be really intriguing to see how this Arizona team handles losing because, I mean, a lot of their starters are freshmen. A majority of Arizona's starters are freshmen. So, and they haven't lost at the college level until Monday. So, it's going to be interesting to see whether or not they rebound quickly. And by rebound, I don't mean like grabbing the basketball. I mean, getting back to their winning ways. But it's going to be interesting to see whether or not they can just take the loss, put it in the past, and then just go and beat Texas Tech. Now, I think this will be a very close game. Very close. Even though I think Arizona is a much better team than Texas Tech, I think it's going to be close simply because of the fact that they're going to be dealing with the loss. And if Arizona plays the way that they played in the last 10 minutes of the game against Kansas, against this Texas Tech team, this Texas Tech team is going to pick them apart from the outside, and they're going to defend well in the paint. Like it's going to be it's going to be a death match. It's going to be an absolute death match, and it is going to be relentless from both of these teams because Texas Tech, they're looking for a big win. Now, obviously Texas Tech would have wanted Arizona to be number one, go into the McHale Center and beat them. That would have been a much better win for the Red Raiders. But no, Kansas had to get ahead of them and then take them down. But Texas Tech is looking at the outcome of that game, I'm sure, and they're saying to themselves, well, we only lost to Kansas by 3 points. And Kansas was very close with Arizona majority of the game, and they were able to find a way to get ahead at the end and win. And Texas Tech is a team that is very capable of doing the same exact thing. So I think, yes, they lost to Kansas by 3, but they did also just beat West Virginia. They're going to have a game against Colorado tomorrow at 7. So I think looking at that game, it's going to be interesting to see how they play and whether or not they are looking ahead to Arizona. Now, I think Colorado could maybe sneak up on this team and get ahead of Texas Tech early, possibly. But the way that Iowa State dominated them, last time when they played, I think I said something very similar that, maybe Colorado can catch them off guard. That did not happen. That did not happen. So I don't really think Colorado is a team, they're a decent team, but I just don't think they're capable of catching a team like Texas Tech off guard like that. So, again, Arizona is still going to have that number 1 mark next to them when they play Texas Tech. So Texas Tech can still technically say that they took down the number 1 team in the country, but yeah, it's going to be just absolutely electric. I cannot wait for that Texas Tech Arizona game. It's going to be so much fun. But yeah, Texas Tech, like I said before, it wasn't just the Kansas game where they were spiraling. They were actually trying to get out of a funk that they were in because they lost 80-88 to UCF. So, yeah, and that might have been partially because they played the currently number 3 ranked team in the country, Houston, 90-80, and they beat them. So I think that game probably took a lot out of the Red Raiders, and ultimately led to their loss to UCF. But yeah, I think it will be very interesting to see how Texas Tech plays and handles the fact that they're going up against the number one team in the country at their place, and Arizona sitting on this loss for a school week. It's basically a school week that they're sitting on this loss. So, actually, no, it's a little more than a school week. It's like 6 days. So they're going to be sitting on this loss for 6 days. That's a long time to sit on a loss. So I'm, again, just very curious to see how this plays out and what it's going to look like. Like whether or not Arizona just completely spirals out of control and just goes on a losing streak and gets really cold, or if they just absolutely beat the pants off of Texas Tech by like 30 points. I don't really think there's going to be anything in between. I feel like it's going to be really close between both these teams, and somehow Texas Tech could come out with the win, or Arizona just ekes out a win, or Arizona is just going to absolutely kill them and just take out all of their frustration on this Texas Tech team. So, yeah, just absolutely a very, very fun game that is coming up. We've also got, and this one I think could be a huge upset coming up. And I'm not just saying this because, IU, but I'm more saying this just because Indiana, the game that Wilkerson had last night against Oregon was absolutely insane. He tied his scoring record this year. 41 points. He scored 41 points against Oregon. Now, obviously, it was in Assembly Hall, but still, he was going off. And in that game against Oregon, that's the best I've seen Indiana look in a while, since the beginning of the year. I mean, they were shooting so efficiently, and it was so hard to fathom. I'm not even going to lie. They were shooting 60% from the field the entire game and 41% from three. They made 11 threes and 30 field goals. Both these teams were fouling like crazy, though. Oregon was at the line 25 times and IU was at the line 27 times, but it was absolutely crazy. Now, I think the one thing going against Indiana in this game against Illinois is the turnovers. Now, I think if Indiana is able to clean up these turnovers against Illinois, they could maybe, and this is a long shot, but maybe Illinois gets caught off guard by this Indiana team. Illinois is playing Wisconsin today at 7 p.m. Indiana doesn't play another game until this Illinois game. And this Wisconsin team took Indiana to overtime. They took them to overtime. Now, ultimately, Indiana won. And some people were calling it a little controversial just because of the fouls, but they were fouls. I don't know what people want. You want to just not call fouls? Come on. But, yeah, it was a crazy ending to the Indiana-Wisconsin game. Wilkerson pretty much put the team on his back in that one, which was very fun to watch. He just would not stop scoring, and he was constantly getting fouled, so he just kept going to the line. But yeah, I think this Wisconsin team could maybe beat up this Illinois team. This is at Illinois, though. But Wisconsin does have... they did beat Michigan when Michigan was undefeated. They were Michigan's loss. They were Michigan's only loss. So I think it'll be very interesting to see what happens in this game against Wisconsin and then going into this game against Indiana. Now, obviously, these weekend games, I don't normally like making predictions just because, you make predictions based off of hypotheticals, but when you're making predictions off of hypotheticals that are also off of hypotheticals, it gets really difficult, okay? It gets really difficult to keep track. Well, maybe not keep track, but just, string it together. Because, if you're wrong, in maybe Wisconsin beats Illinois. And then Illinois doesn't look as invincible. Now, Illinois is going to be going into this Indiana game with a much different mindset than what they were going to if they beat Wisconsin or if they blew out Wisconsin. But I think it'll be very interesting just because I think Indiana is getting hot around the right time. Illinois, obviously losing to Michigan State, that hurts them a lot. Like, that hurts. And they're going to be sitting on that. Like, they've been sitting on that since Saturday, and now they're playing Wisconsin. So I think it'll be fun. It'll be very fun, for sure. But, yeah, I'm just, like, I'm a little nervous because I know Indiana also needs this win, I think, to really solidify themselves into the tournament. If Indiana gets this win, I think they're 100% going to be in the March Madness tournament because having wins over UCLA, Illinois, and Purdue, two of those teams currently ranked, that would pretty much seal the deal for Indiana. And Indiana, they don't have a bad record either. So, like, they're right behind Wisconsin in the Big Ten standings. They're currently 17-8. Like, it's not a bad record. Having less than 10 losses, I think, is good. Indiana's currently 8-6 in the Big Ten. They're currently 10th in the conference, so obviously they're not going to get a first-round bye. But they're also not going to be playing the number one team either as of right now, I don't think. But, yeah, it'll definitely be a very interesting game for sure. Now, there's kind of a rivalry between Indiana and Illinois basketball. This is one that always kind of confused me, and this is, I don't know. It just always confused me because, like, we don't have a rivalry really in football. Like, we don't have a trophy game like Illinois and Purdue do. So, like, but the reason I think why the Indiana-Illinois game is kind of considered a in-conference rivalry is because there's a lot of people from Illinois that do go to Indiana and they grow up watching Illinois football and Illinois basketball, or maybe their parents went to Illinois, or they just have some kind of ties to the University of Illinois, right? So they go in and then they're, obviously rooting for IU. And I feel like that has kind of generated some kind of organic rivalry, I guess. But yeah, I think it'll be a very intriguing game. And obviously I'm hoping that IU wins. But, after being hot and sitting and resting, sometimes that can hurt you. And that's also what makes me a little bit nervous about this game as well. Okay, so kind of going back to the AP poll. Okay, so the AP poll. I wanted to go back to this and end on this, just because obviously we have a little bit less than a minute left. But just looking at the AP poll, again, I just want to make a bold prediction about who I think is going to spiral and maybe become unranked, because I think that is something that could very well happen. It is very possible for this to happen, I think it's BYU. I think BYU. I think they'll become unranked. And maybe that's bold. They're not really going up against crazy teams. They're going up against Baylor and Colorado. Obviously, Colorado is not like anyone to really be afraid of. But I think the Baylor game, since it's at Baylor, I think could be a scary one for BYU. And I'm mostly saying that because of the way they handled the Oklahoma State game. I really don't like how they handled that. They really did not handle themselves all that well. And Colorado and Baylor are not that far off in conference-wise to BYU or Oklahoma State. They're all kind of in the middle of the Big 12 standings right now. So, yeah. All right, that's all that we have time for today. Tune in next week for more college basketball and Winter Olympics updates and swimming updates. And tune in for some bold common sense predictions, because you know what? We don't see enough common sense predictions out in the sports world. With that being said, see you all next week. Slide out.